This episode is brought to you by Hostfully. Using Hostfully, you can create a free digital guidebook for your listing so that you can save time creating a professional experience for every guest that comes and visits your spot. Learn more at hostfully.com.
Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome.
Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad. Get paid for your pad.
Welcome, another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad, and today I am talking to Alexander Limpert, who is the CEO and founder of GuestReady, which is, I think, a fairly large a vacation rental management company. And I actually met Alex recently in Taipei, where I was running a coaching program, and I met him through a common friend, Roger Lee, who you may have heard of because he was a guest in episode 161, Lessons Learned from 7 Years of Airbnb Hosting in Taipei. Roger has a really cool Airbnb business going on in the beautiful city of Taipei. So if you're ever in Taipei, make sure to check out his listings. I'll put a link up. So shout out to Roger. I know he's probably listening. Famously, he told me he used this podcast as a way to fall asleep, which I thought was quite interesting. But for now, Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jaspers. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the podcast, and it's really awesome that I can be joining you today. And what a coincidence indeed that we met in Taiwan and got introduced by Roger, who I know for a couple of years already. But actually back then when we met, I didn't really know that much about Airbnb, and I didn't know that we would ever end up being in the same business. So things come together, and that's great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you like your time in Taiwan?
I'm a big fan of Taiwan, really, and actually also GuestReady got started there. I had the idea for GuestReady when I was in Taiwan more than 3 years ago, and actually the first time I was in Taiwan is about 10 years ago, and since then I've always been a big fan, and I try to go back to Taiwan as often as possible, and this time for Chinese New Year, so lots of good food, even more than usual.
Absolutely. I quite enjoyed my time as well there, but I'm back in Europe now, in Paris actually, and gonna be traveling a little bit and then back to home, which is Barcelona. So I'm excited about that. But let's talk about GuestReady. So can you give us an introduction about what GuestReady is?
Sure. Yeah, would love to do that. So as I just said, it started all a bit more around 3 years ago when I was in Taiwan. Back then I was actually country managing director for Food Panda, which is a food delivery service. And I was hosting on Airbnb, and I found it quite difficult sometimes to deal with all these offline operations like key handover, getting the unit ready for guests, cleaning, linen service, etc. Because most of the time when I wanted to use Airbnb to host, I was not there myself. And basically at the time at Food Panda, we were solving sort of a similar challenge for restaurants in the sense that we helped them to get bookings for delivery orders, and then also help them to deliver, because what we found out is that restaurants are very good at cooking delicious food, but they're maybe not that good at delivering that food and running those offline operations. So when we started this business, we were relying on very primitive technology. We were texting the riders these orders. We were having a whiteboard with magnets where each of the riders was a magnet on the board to basically track those orders. And the real game changer for us came with technology when we had basically apps for the riders, when we had tablets for the restaurants, and all those orders would be seamlessly coordinated. And for me, hosting on Airbnb, it was sort of a similar challenge that all these offline operations needed to be coordinated in a way. And I thought that maybe we can build a similar technology for just a different sort of industry. And that's kind of where it all started. I have two co-founders who also had some interesting insights into the business through a small venture fund that they were running. And they were back in the days looking at some companies that were doing something similar. So things came together and we kicked it off. I left Food Panda and I started GuestReady full time. We did something pretty crazy. We started in 6 cities at the same time, 3 in Asia, 3 in Europe. Originally, we just wanted to start in Asia because we saw a huge opportunity there and we didn't see anyone doing something similar for other hosts to help them host. But then looking at the market, we saw that Europe is still a much more mature market, much bigger market. So we said, let's also start in Europe. Let's take some of these learnings and then transfer them to Asia. And that's what we did. It was pretty hard in the beginning, I need to say, because in each city, we only had one person on the ground. And in London, that was me. And we started really from the basics, did everything ourselves. I cleaned the properties, I did the key handovers, etc. And from the beginning, also, we were working on building the technology that would enable us to scale more. But obviously, in the beginning, we weren't that advanced. So only with time, we got a better setup. We got a more stable and scalable setup. And I'm happy to say that by now we're at this sort of scale that we're now. We manage about 1,000 properties globally in 10 cities, 6 countries, and manage thousands of bookings a month. So yeah, I would say I'm quite happy where we came so far, from cleaning the properties myself to having a team and a good technology in place to be able to run it.
Must have been a pretty hectic time in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
I can imagine, if you're going to start this management company in 6 different cities at the same time. And I think most people start in one city.
Exactly, that's absolutely right. I think it's really a very different way of how most of the businesses in our sort of industry grew. Most of the businesses, they grew with probably just one person managing one Airbnb, and then some friends heard about the success and say, hey, can you manage my Airbnb too? And then from there it grows, and all of a sudden those people find themselves with maybe managing 10, 20, up to 50 properties. And we kind of came in with a different view and tried to build something really scalable from the beginning. I think it was really hard in the beginning, but now actually it helps us to build something that scales across just not just the city, but across different cities. And I think that's what a lot of other companies that maybe just started from one city are struggling with, that they understand that local market really well, and that they have like a really good brand locally, but then it's hard to expand. And for us, we've been able to be successful in different cities. And I think we couldn't have done that if we just grew from one city. I think it would have been much more difficult.
Awesome. So which cities are you in right now?
So currently in the UK, we're in London, where I am today as well. It's the biggest city for us. And then we're also in Manchester and Edinburgh. And then in France, we're in Paris and Cannes in southern France. In Portugal, we're in Porto and Lisbon. And then we're also in Dubai, in Kuala Lumpur and Hong Kong.
How would you say are the markets in Asia different from the markets in Europe?
I would say the markets in Asia are still a bit more nascent. Home sharing or short-term rentals hasn't been around for that long. If we look at the European markets, people have been used to that sort of concept actually way longer than Airbnb. Before, it was probably a bit less of an urban concept, but more of a typical vacation rental concept, where people would rent their chalets in the mountains or their bungalows at the beach. And so that concept has been around much more. So I think also that's why Airbnb was able to get much more traction in cities when they first got started. So I think the Asian markets are still a bit more new to that idea. I think there might be some exceptions, maybe like, for example, Taiwan, where Minsu has been a concept that has been around for ages as well. But in general, I think the markets are a bit more nascent. But I think we see really good growth rates there. And That's why I'm pretty bullish overall on the Asian markets as well. Obviously, one thing to consider is that the ADRs, what we can charge per day, is a bit lower, and that's why we've so far been a bit more focusing on Europe. But I think the Asian markets have really good potential.
ADR means average daily rate?
Yes, yeah, that's
Okay,
what I meant. Yeah,
awesome. So give us some insight. How do you manage to, you've got 1,000 properties. That's a lot. How do you manage all that efficiently, and what kind of technology do you use?
Yeah. So we said to get to this sort of scale that we want to get to, and now we're at 1,000 properties, but that's probably not where we're going to stop. We have much more ambitious plans. Our goal is to build a really good brand for property management that is recognized internationally, something that maybe a Marriott or Hilton have done in the hotel space, where now asset owners know that if they want to work with a hotel flag, that they can work with Marriott or with Hilton, or something that Oyo Rooms is now doing as well. So that's what we want to do for short-term rentals. And for that, we said there's not going to be really a third-party property management system out there that we can just use off the shelf. So we need to build this in-house, and we focused on that from the beginning, actually. And there are a couple of key parts to that system that I can run you through. One is that we have very granular property information. A second part is sort of the admin interface for managing the different tasks, for keeping an overview, scheduling and assigning. The third part is the provider apps, where the people that are actually delivering the services have iOS and Android apps that allow them to see exactly what they need to do. And the fourth part is the host dashboard, where actually our property owners can log in and see certain information. So starting from kind of the customer journey, when somebody comes on board with us, they get sent an onboarding form. That onboarding form is super extensive, has about 200 items on it that we need to know about each property, from where the fuse boxes are located, how the locks work, how the access to the building works, where if there's sort of like an alarm in the property, how the washing machine works, etc. Very granular information, so that we can manage actually everything remotely, and we don't ever need to go to the property, and we can just troubleshoot everything from our office. And that actually, that onboarding form gets filled out most of the time by the host themselves. That has brought down the time that an account manager spends onboarding from about 4 hours to 1 hour, which has been really good to be able to onboard more properties. And that information then flows from this form into our system. It's stored in a way that we can access it very systematically. The second part is this admin interface, where we have sort of scheduling algorithms that basically suggest the best providers for each job. Currently, there's still some sort of a manual overlay to assign providers. And in future, this will be fully automatic, that whenever a booking comes in, those jobs are scheduled automatically and assigned to the right person to do. The third part is this provider app, where basically all our staff on the ground, they see exactly what they need to do. So they have task lists per job. They can give in their availability, when they're available, in which areas they're available. And they can upload pictures. They can see the pictures, how it should look like, for example, for a cleaning, how the property should look like. For the check-in or the cleaning, they also get detailed information for each booking about, if they should arrange a sofa bed or not, how many guests are coming, where the guests are coming from, etc. So they see all of that in their apps. And then the fourth part, the host dashboard, that's really important for transparency, that our hosts see in one view everything about their revenues, their occupancy, their bookings, and our invoices and billing as well. plus the calendar management. So it allows them to have some flexibility. They can book some time off if they want to stay themselves at a property. I know, for example, that you have a property in Medellin. So if you want to stay there yourself, you could just block that time and say, hey, I'm coming over for 2 weeks, want to stay there myself. Please don't book it with guests. And automatically that would be updated on the different platforms that we list on.
Hi, my name is Margot, and I'm the CEO of Hostfully. We are on a mission to make local travel a lot better, and we're starting with digital guidebooks to make that happen. Using Hostfully digital guidebooks, which work great on any mobile device, on desktop and in print, you can share important property information and local recommendations with your guests. You can also save time and create a great guest experience that each traveler will appreciate. Hostfully guidebooks are very fast to make, and we've included some advanced features where you can feature your custom logo, your colors, custom categories, and essentially your brand. Please take a chance to check us out at hostfully.com.
Okay, so you have cleaning staff and people that do the check-ins and everything on the ground. How do you find people to do those jobs? How do you find good people to do this work?
Yeah, very good question. So it actually depends a bit market per market, I would say. In some markets, for example, for cleaning, we found very good partner companies that work hand in hand with us and that can deliver to our sort of standard that we set. But in other markets, we found it very difficult. So we need to go out and find those cleaners and find people that work with us directly. And we do that through online platforms, job platforms. There are multiple of those platforms out there that we can leverage. And actually that can be also done remotely, and we can train them with video calls, and we have very good guided videos on what needs to be done. Yeah.
What do you say were the biggest challenges to grow this company to over 1,000 listings?
Yeah, I think one is the supply. So supply, getting the right type of supply, because our sort of service doesn't really work for all types of supplies out there. So I would say people that only have availability for like 1 or 2 weeks, we wouldn't be able to really help them that much, because investing all this effort into onboarding, and then you can only host for a couple of weeks, that's not really that worth for it. So it needs to be at least 2 months to be able to really be worth it. Then also the location of that supply, we need it to be quite central. And we also have a certain standard for the properties that we need to make sure that the guests are happy with those sort of properties, and we can get good ratings for the hosts. So that to get that right supply, that is a bottleneck, but luckily we get a lot of requests. So we've been able to grow to a large portfolio, and we see that traction going, and we actually see that with our brand being more recognized, we get more demand for those services from hosts.
So I can imagine now that you've established this company for 3 years and you have over 1,000 listings, I can imagine you get a lot of people reaching out, and so you can kind of grow organically. But I think the biggest challenge is always at the start when you don't have any listings yet. Like, how do you get let's say the first 5 or 10 listings from the ground?
Yeah, so the first few listings I actually got by directly reaching out to people on different real estate platforms. So that was me just sending out hundreds of requests to people that wanted to rent out their property long term, and then I just reached out to them and asked them if they would be interested to list also short term. In the end, I think that sort of strategy to do direct outreach is a bit limited, because most people that do want to rent out long term, they want to stick with that model, and they're not really that keen on trying short term rentals. But for the beginning, it got us the initial traction. And we also initially had the hypothesis that most of our clients would come from Airbnb directly. But again, that hypothesis didn't really prove itself valid, because let's face it, most of the hosts that are on Airbnb, they have probably found a way that they can manage the properties. So what we now see is that 80% of our hosts, they've actually not really tried Airbnb short-term rentals before. And they reach out to us, they search for services, and they find us online because we've some good content out there on our blog, or because they search for certain keywords that we rank high for on Google, and then they find us, and that's how we actually mostly expand.
So you talked a little bit about quality control. Now, I can imagine it must be really hard to keep up the 5-star ratings, especially if you're managing over 1,000 properties.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? How do you make sure that that all the customers are happy? Because I mean, it's even if you have one listing, it can be quite a challenge to keep those 5-star reviews coming, because I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. A lot of people are just not easily satisfied as well. So how do you manage to do that?
Yeah, I think for us, there are like two layers. One is that, or a couple of layers, I would say. That the first is that we train our staff quite carefully. We have found a really good way to do this, mostly with videos, so that they get to know what the GuestReady standards are in a very scalable way. But then also we shadow them for their first couple of jobs and make sure that they are doing the right things. That's the first step. The second step is that after each cleaning, we see the pictures and we review the pictures actually online as well, and sign off. And the third is that we're always having the finger on the pulse in terms of the reviews that we get from guests. And if we see any sort of negative trend there, then we can react immediately. And we also know who of our staff is performing at what sort of level, so we can pick this up with the respective providers.
So cleaning is one thing, right? Having a clean property obviously is very important to get a 5-star reviews. Also, not just the cleaning, but just getting the space ready for that specific group of guests that you're hosting. You mentioned, the different groups of guests have different requirements, but there's some other stuff involved as well, right? It's setting the right expectations. The listings have to be accurate. Communication. Yeah. Can you comment a little bit on the other aspects?
Yeah, for the listing, as you say, that's kind of where it starts. We have some pretty strict guidelines there as well. That initially, I guess we learned that it doesn't make sense to oversell the property, or not to highlight certain aspects that maybe then the guests could complain about. So examples are that if the property is on a higher floor and doesn't have an elevator, then you should probably mention this somewhere pretty prominently on the listing, because in the end, you don't want those guests that have dozens of 20 kilogram worth of luggages bringing that up the stairs, and similar things that are maybe a bit special about some properties that could be suitable for one type of guest but could not be that suitable for another type of guest. We just make sure that we highlight those sort of particularities about the listing and are quite upfront about it. Still selling the property, selling the good sides of the property, but also making sure that the guests understand the specialties about each property. And also we have a team, a content team, that is signing off each property before it goes live, each listing, and that writes the descriptions as well based on the onboarding. That's kind of where it all starts. And then in terms of communication, we now have a 24/7 guest communications team based in Malaysia that is also really trained for the different types of guest communication, pre-booking, post-booking, when the stay starts, and also after the stay, when it's about things like potential changes to the bookings, making sure that the deposit is refunded. That's not an issue on Airbnb, but on other platforms. So that has also really helped us, that we have somebody there, a dedicated team 24/7 who is really focused on responding to the guests in a good way. And then for the check-in, again, our staff there is dedicated for those jobs. We have what we call meet and greeters, a team of meet and greeters, and basically the job that they're doing is just to meet the guests and welcome them at the property, show them around, tell them a bit about the city and about the surroundings of the property. And they're doing this as their main tasks at GuestReady. So they're really dedicated and they know how to do a good job there.
So it sounds to me that for every task that is involved in the whole hosting process, the main factor in your success is just you're being very professional. You're working with professionals. For every task, there's somebody who specializes in that particular task, and that sounds to be working out pretty well for you.
Yeah, I think that's how it naturally evolved. That in the beginning, one person would do everything, and that's how it also is when you host yourself Airbnb. Then you do everything yourself. But as we grow, it's important that we have specialists for each area of the business. And then the challenge just becomes that those people communicate with each other. But for that, we have internal tools like Slack, for example, or Trello, or our management system as well internally, where people can collaborate and comment and make sure that that everybody's on the same page.
You mentioned a bunch of tools during this chat. I'll make sure to mention all those in the show notes so that people can take a look at the different tools. Thanks so much, Alex. I'm sure we can talk for a long time, but this has been pretty interesting. If there's people listening who are looking for a management company in the locations where you are, where can they go?
They can go on www.guestready.com and they can find us there. And we have a page for each city where they can find out more about the services that we provide there. And also, I would say that one thing that we're working on is to open up our technology to other property managers out there. So that's something that is in the making. It's not quite ready yet because we said first we need to make sure that we have a kick-ass system that works for us internally. But I think we're getting very close where we can also open this up to other property managers out there. And we've had some really good conversations with other property managers already that gave us the indication that this could be really helpful for them. And I think they're really good opportunities for us to provide this sort of property management system that has created by one property management company also to others out there that maybe didn't have the resources, weren't able to raise funds like us to build such a system in-house, because it takes quite a lot of investment to build that.
That's really awesome. I mean, from talking to dozens of property management companies around the world, I can definitely say that the technology aspect of it is probably the one thing that people find the hardest to really get working. So I'm sure that's going to be super helpful to other property management managers out there. So if you're listening and you are managing properties, go to GuestReady.com and reach out to Alexander or reach out to me, and we'll get you in touch. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and hopefully we'll run into each other again, maybe in Taiwan or in London or anywhere else on this planet.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jasper. It was really fun.
And to the listeners, thanks for listening. And next Wednesday we'll be back with another episode, so hope to see you then.
Get paid for your pet. Get paid for your pet. Get paid for your pet. Get paid for your pad.